All right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to continue with our material relating to skeletal systems. So let's see where we left off. Okay, where we were left off, we were talking about the axial skeleton, and more specifically, we were referencing the rib cage. Just remember that the axial skeleton is made up of three distinct regions. You have the rib cage, which is going to be the ribs and the sternum. You're going to have the vertebral column, also known as the spine, and then you're going to have the skull, which the skull is made up of numerous bones altogether. It's made up of the cranium, which is basically everything eyebrows up, and you also have the facial bones, which is going to be the bones that make up your face. All right, so today we get to talk more about the appendicular skeleton. Appendicular skeleton is going to be more the appendages. So there's three distinct regions of the appendicular skeleton: the pectoral girdle, the limbs, and then the pelvic girdle. In the context here, by the way, the term girdle is just referencing to a couple bones that have joined together to form like a semicircular structure. Okay, so let's start from the top. Pectoral girdle. The pectoral girdle, also known as your shoulder, it is two bones on each side, so four total bones. These bones allow for incredible range of movement in the upper limbs. That's the big thing that they provide. So the upper limbs have a wider range of movement. If you just move your arm around, you notice that you have a wide range of motion in many different directions. And that's thanks in part to how the shoulder is structured, but also the joints that are found there, which we'll talk more about in our next video. What are the bones that we find here? Well, we have the clavicle, which is going to be your collarbone. Literally, if you're wearing a shirt, a t-shirt, or any collared shirt, it's where your collar is. So your collarbone or your clavicle, I would make sure you know either name. It is this S-shaped structure. It does an amazing job of stabilizing your shoulders. So your shoulders are supposed to be even on both sides. But the problem is with the clavicle is that it's a very weak bone. It's very structurally weak. So it's very easy to fracture that bone, especially if you're not comfortable or if you are playing a contact sport. If you're playing a contact sport, you lower your shoulder into a tackle, or even you catch a ball and you hit the ground hard, that can cause a fracture of that area. What else do we find in the pectoral girdle? We also have what's called the scapula. You can feel your scapula ever so softly on the shoulder region, but it's much easier to feel it if you touch your back area. So touching your upper back area, you can feel the scapula. It is called the shoulder blade. It's this triangular shaped bone. And that's what we see here, right? Here we see the clavicle. It's a sideways S, very, very, very thin, flat bone. Here we see the scapula. The scapula, more than anything, helps to maintain and regulate the clavicle. That's the big thing there. Okay, bones of the upper limb. So as far as the upper limb is concerned, we have three major bones: the upper arm bones, the forearm bones, and then the hand bones. So let's talk about that. Quite literally, all I need you to know is that the upper arm bone is called the humerus. The end. Nothing crazy, nothing out of the ordinary here. Just know that the upper arm bone is known as the humerus. We don't need to know too much more than that. Now, the bones of the forearm, things get a little bit tricky. Regarding the bones of the forearm, if you notice, they're two parallel bones, so it can be tricky to notice which is which. So what I do is I throw up a hang loose sign. So when you're throwing up a hang loose sign, if you follow your thumb and you touch your forearm, the part that follows your thumb is going to be your radius. If you follow your pinky, the part that follows your pinky is going to be your ulna. The way I remember that, another mnemonic, is I think of turning a radio knob with my thumb. So turning a radio knob with my thumb, radius, radio, that works. Again, whatever it takes for you to remember, but I think the hang loose mnemonic is as good as it's going to get. The hand. There are a number of different carpal bones or wrist bones. There are 8 different bones that I can see here. We don't need to learn all those. We're definitely not needing to learn all that. Honestly, I'm perfectly fine with just learning that the group of bones together found in the wrist are known as the carpals. The metacarpals are going to be the bones of your palm. You can physically feel them pretty easily, right? They make up your palm. And then we have also the phalanges. The phalanges are going to be the bones of your fingers. Interestingly enough, it would be important for you guys just to be able to identify that this right here is the thumb, right? Worst comes to worst, if you're questioning, wait, which one's the thumb, which one's the pinky? Just put your hand up to it. put your hand up to the screen and you can physically see, okay, well, my thumb kind of comes out a little bit more compared to the rest of the fingers. So that's why. What's interesting, though, when it comes down to how we name the number or number the fingers, typically we think of your index finger as number 1, right? In anatomy, the thumb is actually considered number 1. Then the index fingers 2, 3, 4, and 5. Pretty interesting how that works, right? Okay. Overall, not bad. Now we get to transition into pelvic girdle. So we're moving our way down. The pelvic girdle is not only the hips, it's a couple other things too. So the hip bones are known as coxal bones. That is another name that we utilize. So the coxal bones, I would make sure we're comfortable with that. You also have the sacrum and the coccyx, though. The sacrum and the coccyx, if you remember from our previous video, is part of the vertebral column. So it's all bones that are joined together. What's the purpose of the pelvic girdle? Well, the major purpose is to balance the weight of their upper body. Most of our upper body, or most of our weight, is going to be in our upper body. So you want to make sure that your body can maintain that weight. What else does the pelvic girdle do? It also protects several organs. As you're about to see on the side coming up, many organs are protected in this region: reproductive organs, urinary bladder, part of the large intestine. So you want to make sure that these areas are properly defended. Here we can see what the pelvic girdle looks like. Again, I always think that this middle section here reminds me of a face hugger or a chest burster from Alien or Aliens of the sequel, if you ever watched the Ridley Scott movies, incredible films. But what it is interesting relating to the pelvic girdle is that the pelvic girdle is actually 3 distinct bones together. We have this bone here, which is going to be the sacrum and coccyx, which is part of the vertebral column. Then, just to change color real quick, we have a coxal bone here and another coxal bone here. So you actually have 2 separate coxal bones that connect to the sacrum and coccyx to form the pelvic girdle. So it's 3 bones altogether. Okay. Let's go ahead and erase this. All right. Now, speaking of the coxal bone or the hip, there are some structures here that we need to be aware of, and I'll try to use some color coding so we can see exactly where this stuff belongs. We have the ilium. First, the ilium is considered the largest part of the coxal bone. So I'm going to use red to indicate the ilium. So what is the ilium? Well, the ilium is basically going to be all of this, all of this, all of this, all of this. This is all considered to be part of the ilium. I'll erase a little bit right there. Okay. Now, at the very top of the ilium, we actually have a structure called the iliac crest. So I'll use a color similar to red, but slightly different. So the iliac crest, I'm going to use a little bit of this magenta pink color. What's the point of the iliac crest? Well, if you touch your sides where your hips are, this is the part of your hips that you can physically feel very easily, right? Right on your sides. Also, in the case of an emergency surgery where you're donating bone marrow to somebody, this is also where they typically take bone marrow out of you. Next, we have the ischium. Let's use a different color for the ischium. So the ischium is going to be the most inferior part of the hip. So as you can tell, that's going to be all of this and all the way up to here too. So the ischium is actually going to be, the major purpose of it is also going to be for connecting the femur to this structure. Finally, we have the pubis. The pubis is going to be essentially all of this. Okay, so let me go ahead and erase a little bit of that. There we go. Now, I forgot to color code this in here. Let's go back to where we were. It's not the same green, but close enough. And then they're blue for the ischium. Now, again, what we were mentioning was the pubis is going to be the most anterior part of the coxal bone. So it's the part of the bone that actually protrudes forward. In people who are very physically fit, who exercise a lot, and I'm talking about like really do a lot of core exercises as well, you see in this region what we commonly refer to as a V cut. It's literally what looks like a V right above the groin area. That, again, not only do you have to have a lot of muscular fitness and a lot of core strength, but it's also the pubis kind of protruding outward. There is also this pubic symphysis structure here, but we don't get too crazy with that, so don't have to worry about that too much. So let's go ahead and erase this stuff. Yeah, the symphysis, it's literally there to connect the two pubic bones together as far as on the coxal bones. Okay, there are some sex differences. Let me go ahead and change this real quick. We'll talk more about this in future videos. There is a difference between gender and sex, so that should be clarified. But the sex differences of the pelvis, in men and women, we do observe some differences that should be noticed and noted. In men, the pelvis is going to be not as wide or broad. Pelvic cavity is funnel-shaped. Bones are heavier and larger. Pubic arch is more narrow, less than 90 degrees. Why is that the case? The big thing here, the bones are heavier and larger. Genetically speaking, men are typically heavier than women and larger than women. Does that always happen? No. There are women that are taller than men. There are women that are bigger than men. But most of the cases, that's what we observe. Women, females, wider pelvis and broader hips. Pelvic cavity is shallow. Bones are lighter and thinner. Pubic arch is wider, greater than 90 degrees. Why do women have this broader hips, wider pelvis, greater than 90-degree pubic arch? Childbirth, right? So that's how you can easily summarize this stuff without getting too crazy. Okay, bones of the lower limb. There are a couple different lower limb structures that we need to know: the thigh, kneecap, leg, and the foot. Let's talk about the femur or the thigh. It is the thigh bone, one of the largest bones of the human body, so one of the strongest bones of the human body as well. We got to make sure we know this. Again, I always think of the classic cartoon bone that's like somebody uses when they're clubbing somebody, but typically going to be a femur. The patella, you don't really see it on this picture, so let me go ahead and go back so I can show you guys. Let's go with the bright red. The patella is actually right. Oh, did not mean to do that. Hold on. The patella is right here. It's your kneecap, right? You can very easily feel your patella. Not too tricky to find. But the point of it is pretty important. It's a triangular bone that protects the knee joints. It also protects the ligaments found in the area like the ACL and the MCL. But those joints are essential for walking. If you ever try walking with your knees locked, you're like waddling. It's not very efficient. Okay, the bones of the lower leg. The bones of the lower leg are similar to what we find in the bones of the upper arm, but the biggest difference is that unlike the upper arm, where you had two parallel bones that kind of looked similar, now you have two parallel bones where one of the bones is double the size. It's massive. And that's going to be the tibia. The tibia is the much larger of the two. It's also known as your shin bone. It is medial, meaning if you follow the big toe up, so if you're following the big toe up, you're going to find the tibia. It's much larger because it has to bear the weight of the femur. So it helps to manage how heavy the femur is, which is pretty important. The fibula, while it's much smaller, it plays a very important role in stability. It is lateral, so it's on the outside of the body. You follow the pinky toe for that. But while it is much smaller, again, it stabilizes the ankles so that your ankles don't roll as often. That's very important. I mentioned this time and time again, and you'll see it coming up on the next slide. But I do think that the most important toes of your body are going to be your pinky toe and your big toe. Big toe for obvious reasons. It's literally your largest toe. You put most of your pressure there. But pinky toe, because your pinky toe keeps it so that you maintain balance. All right, finally, we're in the foot. Once again, you look at the foot and the ankle bones. There's a lot of different ankle bones here. They're pretty large compared to the wrist bones. And it makes sense. They have to be larger because they're supporting the weight of the body. But those are called your tarsals. Just need to know that they're called tarsals. I don't need you to learn every single one of them individually. Metatarsals are going to be the soles of your feet, right? Hey, remember meta? We heard that with metacarpals. So keep that in mind. Also, try to make sure that you don't confuse the two. Tarsals are for feet. Carpals are for hands. I think of driving a car with your hands on the steering wheel. Then finally, phalanges. That's your toes. Hey, wait a second. Didn't I just say earlier in this video that phalanges are your fingers? They are. It's just that the bones that make your phalanges in your toes are the same bones that make your phalanges in your feet. Or in your fingers, sorry. So it's the same thing. So no confusion there. It's all the same. All right. So that's where we're going to stop. Making great progress, guys. I think we have 1 or 2 videos left for this unit, and then we'll be all finished. All right. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you check in on the next one. Have a great day.